British Columbia Conservatives, they chose their new leader over the weekend.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next leader and Premier of British Columbia, Kerry-Lynne Findlay.
Kerry-Lynne Findlay was narrowly elected to lead British Columbia's official opposition party. It comes as the division in the Conservative Caucus has been no secret in BC, no secret anywhere really, as the push to unite the party now falls on Findlay. For more on this, I'm joined by the CBC's Katie DeRosa and by Rob Shaw from CHEK News. It's good to see you both. Thanks for being here. Katie, start with you. Findlay, a divisive figure in some parts of the party, but now the leader of the BC party. Some of her opponents in the race criticized her publicly for her rhetoric. What's the reaction to this been?
Yeah, you certainly ran sort of more of a populist, further to the right campaign. I mean, a lot of the candidates were championing the same policies, which is to repeal DRIPA, repeal sexual orientation or gender identity or SOGI in schools. So they had a lot of similarities, but certainly Kerry-Lynne Findlay was criticized by some of her own former colleagues in the federal Conservative Caucus for her attacks on Peter Millibar, saying that he couldn't have a competent positions on DRIPA or Indigenous issues because of his wife and her Indigenous heritage. That received a lot of attacks. So now and she also attacked former BC Liberals for trying to infiltrate and take over the party, and she said she's a true Conservative. So now the question is, some of those BC Liberals are now BC Conservatives in her caucus, and what is she going to do to extend an olive branch and make this a big tent party and avoid the fissures that we were seeing under John Rustad?
Well, Rob, 51-49, piece of cake with that kind of a mandate, right? To put it all back together. What do you make of the challenge ahead of her?
Yeah, overwhelming mandate? No, not quite. Typically, David, you see this with party leadership races. When you win by such a narrow amount, you usually try to reach out, maybe invite the second place person to be a senior part of your leadership team, reach out to the members and say, listen, 49% of you didn't support me, but I hear you. I can bring your positions into the party. We've heard nothing really like that from Kerry-Lynne Findlay yet. She did a kind of performative event yesterday, turning around to her caucus and saying, are any of you going anywhere? Are you staying with me? And they said, yeah, we're with you, in kind of a weird sort of moment. Like, it is a big task to stitch together and keep together this. And I wonder if that's really what she actually wants. She was very clear in her campaign that there are parts of this party that she's not comfortable with, that exist right now, that are former Liberals, that are not true Conservatives, that failed the loyalty test in her mind of the BC Conservatives. And I'm not sure, as she brings in some folks from the right, that maybe the center exists as much in her mind, nor does she seem to think that she needs it in that way. And that's that'll be interesting to watch.
So Rob, just pull on that thread a little bit more, because Ms. Elliott, who came second here, she had people like Corey Tenike working on her campaign, right? Jeff Ballingall and others like that are more central Canadian, a lot of Doug Ford connections, certainly, and Corey Tenike was obviously a big critic of the Pierre Poilievre campaign, where I would assume Kerry-Lynne Findlay's loyalties and sympathies lie. So what does that tell us about where she wants to take the party and what it might mean in terms of going up against David Eby in the next election?
What allowed her to paint her opponent as this kind of big money Eastern consultant takeover of the Conservative Party, and her as a grassroots person, even though she had people from outside her, province working on her campaign. And it's kind of a weird thing. The current BC Conservatives are not really BC Liberals. They've already been purged once. But Kerry-Lynne Findlay predates John Rustad. She's been around, involved in the BC Conservative Party back when it was just a small, tiny, weird, far-right group that no one paid any attention to. So in some ways, we're going backwards even further. I would describe her, if you're looking at it from a federal lens, she was Minister of Natural Revenue under Stephen Harper and his government. She is not a Harper conservative. She's more of an early Pierre Poilievre conservative, fights the kind of elite, fights the media, fights the woke. That is more, it's more aggressive. It's not the economic conservatism, it's the social new age conservatism.
Okay, so that movement conservatism, and for example, so Katie, the argument for people on Caroline Elliott's campaign was that she's going to be the better candidate in the general election. As Rob just spelled out, maybe Kerry-Lynne Findlay speaks more directly to the base of the British Columbia Conservatives as it continues this evolution. What does this do to the dynamic as they prepare to challenge David Eby and the NDP?
Well, I think the leadership race is always going to be about appealing to the base, and now the big test will be if she can move to the center. I'm sure her team will be polling the general public on some of those more social conservative issues like sexual orientation and gender identity, gender transition for kids. I feel like they might see that's not as much of a broad issue as, affordability and, gas prices and the resource sector. Certainly in her speech, she did mention freedom, protecting children, but she also mentioned the resource economy, appealing to northern BC. She said making stronger alliances with our neighboring provinces, i.e. Alberta. So, clearly she's going to be pushing for that pipeline and setting herself apart from David Eby, who she's going to paint as obstructionist on that pipeline. So I think for a general election, she can capitalize on David Eby flip-flopping on some of those major issues on, the economy, on DRIPA, and position herself as more in touch with the hinterlands, the north, and the resource economy and parts of that province, who she says the NDP has committed economic vandalism against. So. Right. That could be more of a strategy, but again, she has to get the support of her caucus first.
Okay, so Katie, there's speaking of the caucus, there's what, a half dozen MLAs that got expelled or expunged or evicted or defenestrated, whatever verb you want to use, from the caucus for a number of things during the internal upheaval. Does Kerry-Lynne Findlay reach out to them to bring them back or leave them where they are? How do you think that plays?
Well, there's one particular MLA, Jordan Keeley from Peace River North. I talked to him today, and he said at the election night, the results night, he wasn't expected to attend, but he went anyways. Kerry-Lynne Findlay saw him. He did endorse her, as well as Tara Armstrong, another former BC Conservative who left in solidarity with Dallas Brody, who, as you remember, she was kicked out for appearing to mock residential school survivors. She was kicked out by John Rustad. So Jordan Keeley said that Kerry-Lynne Findlay brought him into her inner circle and her team and brought him up on stage when she did her victory dance, kind of going like this. So he expects to be invited back in, but a more controversial person, whether we don't know or not, will be invited back in, is Tara Armstrong. She's made comments in the House basically using a blood and soil language to refer to Indigenous people who the NDP says is using Nazi rhetoric. She would be a lot more divisive, and that could push other more moderates out of the party. So I would say Jordan Keeley, I would bet my money on him. Right. Tara Armstrong, that's up in the air, and Kerry-Lynne Findlay says she's not making any unilateral decisions. She will talk to her caucus first. Okay, Rob, last question to you. I don't know if you want to act out the Kerry-Lynne Findlay victory dance as Katie just did in her answer, but we're
hips
open.
Don't go that way. So
we're open to it. In addition to the expelled MLAs, do you think we might see federal Conservatives who didn't quite get the election outcome they wanted a year ago looking in BC of maybe having a run in the upcoming provincial election there if it looks like there's a shot at government for Kerry-Lynne Findlay?
Well, some of them might be more comfortable with a former federal Conservative cabinet minister like Kerry-Lynne Findlay. And it looks like this party is better positioned than ever before to take on David Eby and the NDP. 9 years in power for the NDP government here. It starts to reach that sniff test. People think maybe if you're in the right spot at the right time, you can take out this government. But honestly, she'll have to pick a lane first here. 49% of the party didn't support her. Does she want to bring them with her and move her positions? Or does she just want to let them go and focus on who she won? That is step one. And people have to see where she lands first before they know if they want to join. It could open up an opportunity for a centrist party here. Federal Liberals, provincial former BC Liberals. Everyone's watching to see if that splits. And that would be a godsend for the BC NDP as well, a split center-right. So we'll have to see what she does first, because no one's quite sure if she intends to stay in the lane of this leadership race or expand out.
I think it's in the Constitution that BC is not allowed to change its political parties for at least 3 more years. I think you've used up your allotment over the past little while. But no, you're not wrong, Rob.
It's the Wild West. It's the Wild West. There's no rules out here.
That is for sure. That is something we're going to have to watch. Look, thank you both for being here. Katie DeRosa, Rob Shaw, always appreciate it. Thanks so much.